Hello and good morning. Welcome to the Goodlord webinar. If we haven't met, or if you're new to our webinar series, my name is William Reeve. I'm the CEO of Goodlord and your host for today. My background is as a technology entrepreneur. I've been involved with a variety of tech-related businesses across the UK, some of which I'm hoping most of you have heard of. Certainly Zoopla, for example, but I've been CEO of Goodlord here for the last 2 years, and this is the 5th of the webinars that we've been running, so very excited to have so many people join today. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please tweet us at SoGoodlord with the hashtag AskARLA, and we'll try and remember to answer, we'll try and get through as many of those questions as possible throughout the section, the relevant section itself, or at the end of the webinar. This is our first webinar broadcasting from home, so I hope that everybody is settling in comfortably. Let me just give those of you who don't know Goodlord a little bit of an introduction. We're a technology company. We provide an end-to-end letting software platform that enables agents to manage the entire pre-tenancy process in one place. Everything from registering new inquiries through to handling the documents electronically, processing all payments. And by partnering with a variety of commercial partners, we enable agents to increase their revenue through selling rent protection insurance, tenant contents insurance, tenant liabilities insurance, helping tenants set up their utilities, their media, do change of occupancy, and we share the revenues that come with that. So we're helping agents reduce admin, improve their customer experience, and because it's an automated platform which automates a lot of the legislative processes, it helps ensure compliance. And of course, in this Corona-affected world, we're working from home. Technology is a savior for a lot of us, and that's really helping replace some physical processes with digital processes. And of course, Goodlord has been at the forefront of that ever since we were founded a few years ago. But of course, since the lockdown started on the 23rd of March, the lettings market as we know it has been dramatically changed. The government has pushed through lockdown and office closures, branch closures. It's pushed the banks to offer 3-month mortgage holidays. It's created a furlough system, enabling employers to temporarily set aside staff. It's tightened eviction processes and pushed for payment plans to be negotiated between landlords and tenants. It's declared it wants nobody moving house, and it's for the first time allowed right to rent checks to be digitally completed. So there's a lot of change all in the space of in a few weeks. What impact has that had on the market? Well, with our position in the market, it gives us a unique vantage point to be able to track the impact and the effect on the lettings market. And in fact, we've been publishing on our Goodlord letting activity tracker on our website daily the figures we're seeing to help keep our customers and the wider industry in the know at all times. What we're seeing is that after an initial really profound shock drop in volumes of almost 80% compared to this time last year, people appear to be starting to get the hang of how you operate the lettings market in a working from home environment. And actually right now, volumes are about 40% down for new tenancies compared to this period last year. However, we do believe the drop in volumes here is a temporary phenomenon, and we do very much think that there's going to potentially be a surge in demand for all of us in store for us when lockdown is lifted. And certainly I think if those of you in our last webinar in March will recognize this chart, but this chart shows the lettings, the size of the lettings market over the last 40 years, in fact, and we've punctuated on it 3 of the really big market crashes and economic downturns there, starting with Black Wednesday in 1987, the dot-com crash in 2000, and the global financial crisis in 2008. And as you can see, none of those very profound economic shocks seem to have much impact on the lettings market, which really carried on regardless. And I think that's the basis for our message, which we've been sharing with our customers. So keep calm and carry on letting. We're grateful for some of you guys for helping us spread that message on social media. And in fact, if any more of you want to help us do that, we have a few t-shirts left. So do let us know, and we will be very, very glad to spread the message further. But we're here today to examine some of the legislative changes. We're very lucky to have David Cox join us, who's been helping us on a few of these webinars now. And David, for those of you who don't know, he's the Chief Executive at ARLA Propertymark. He's a qualified barrister, got many years of experience in the property industry, and he became the ARLA Propertymark Chief Executive in 2014. He's very well known to a lot of people on this webinar, and he's also thankfully well known in Parliament. He does a lot of lobbying on behalf of the lettings industry. So welcome, David.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for joining. Before we kick on, do you want to just maybe say a few words of what you're seeing in the market and what your lessons so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we were saying just before the webinar started, William, what we're seeing is very similar to what you're seeing. We went into lockdown, I think it was the 23rd of March. The Corona Act was passed on the 26th of March, changing the eviction proceedings. And the industry has responded, I think, exceedingly professionally across the board. Some of the things that I've certainly had from members, from agents, from landlords and tenants as well contacting ARLA is how helpful agents have been in trying to solve problems. Just like your previous chart was saying, the information we're getting back is that this isn't like the 2008 house price crash.
Yeah.
It's a very different beast. You know, people aren't moving not because they can't afford to move and not because they don't want to move. It's because they are being physically told by the government you are not allowed to move. And
right.
Having done an awful lot of these webinars and spoken to huge numbers of people around the country over the last few weeks, there is clearly a massive amount of pent-up demand in the market. Our message, as I'm sure everybody knows on this webinar, just put everything on pause. Don't cancel it. You've got a tenant in property B, they want to move out to move into property C. People in property C want to move out to property D, and you've got tenants from property A that want to move into your property B. Don't cancel that chain, don't get rid of that chain. We want that to continue. It's just put it on pause until such time as we're allowed out. The tenant should stay in the property they're living in, paying the rent to the landlord of that property at the rate they've been paying until we're allowed to move. And then I would imagine, depending on how we come out of lockdown, the first Friday out of lockdown is probably going to be one of the biggest moving days in the letting industry's history.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. So David, we've had a lot of questions in advance. We're still taking questions, incidentally. We're happy to take further questions on Twitter at SoGoodlord with the hashtag AskARLA. But we had lots of questions just about how does this work? How can you let's go ahead? Can we get clarity on what's allowed? How do viewings, office visits, check-ins, check-outs, inventories, all that stuff work?
So I suppose the first one is the government have made it very clear. Sales agents, letting agents are not essential workers. Therefore, you don't fall into the category of an essential worker. A house move is not an essential move, except in exceptional circumstances. So where people need to move, that is acceptable. Where people want to move, they've just got to put it on hold. And that's where the hit pause message comes from. So yeah, some of the ones that I've had in is I want to move closer to my girlfriend. Okay, under normal circumstances, that would be absolutely fine. You could even move in with the girlfriend if you want to, rather than just closer. But at the moment, that you don't need to do that. Therefore, stay put. However, on the other hand, there are times where people need to move. And the government has outlined in the guidance quite a few specific examples. So it is effectively if there is a risk to life or limb. So I would use that as your benchmark. If there is a risk to life or limb of the inhabitant of that property, then they need to move. If they don't, or if there isn't, they don't need to move right now. So to give you a few examples, the roof's caved in. That was the first one in the government guidance. Another one, the boiler has stopped working and you're not going to be able to get the boiler fixed. It's more fundamental than just a quick trip round to fix it. Similarly with hot and cold running water, burst pipes, etc. Effectively, if the property is unfit for human habitation. The other one is domestic violence, and if there is a situation of domestic abuse, then of course that is a need to move. The final one then is the essential workers, and that is where I think we are getting a bit of the confusion. For essential workers, it is permitted for them to move. for many reasons. One, to be closer to work. Two, particularly NHS staff that are going into hospitals and exposing themselves to the virus every day. They may have family at home that need to shield, that may be in one of the vulnerable groups, and therefore key workers self-isolating from their family to protect them from the virus is also a perfectly acceptable reason to move.
But so if a non-essential worker, for example, estate agents, if they get a new job on the other side of the country, that they can't take it, they can't move there?
That wouldn't, at the moment, I would suggest, be classed as an essential move.
Right.
I suppose it's something you could do, but I don't think that would be classed as an essential move, and I would suggest put it on hold for the time being. Plus, even if they were going to a new job moving across the country, they wouldn't necessarily be going into an office at the moment. Therefore, it would be home working in any event. So where we do have situations of essential moves, I think you've then got to look at the sorts of properties. If it involves somebody moving out that's not an essential worker, then again, that's where the pause. But if there are empty properties, and we are aware there are many empty properties around the country, it may be possible, whilst complying with the social distancing guidelines from the government, for somebody to rent an empty property.
Yeah.
I think
so let's just talk about that for a second. So the whole question of sort of, okay, so when I have an essential move and I'm trying to complete viewings and paperwork and so on, and I'm trying to obey social distancing, right to rent in particular, can you just talk us through how that works and what the changes to the right to rent checks are, and what happens now versus what happens when lockdown ends?
Yes, absolutely. So as you highlighted in your introduction, William, the right to rent checks have been relaxed during the lockdown, and I would highlight very much during the lockdown.
Yeah.
So whilst we are in a period of lockdown, you can do them virtually. So seeing the person on a video, whilst having a copy of their scanned documents, their scanned passport. So you still need all the documents, but they can be scanned and emailed to you rather than seeing them in person. And you have to use the normal list. But as long as you've got the scanned documents, you've then done a video call to see that the person that is on the video is the same person as in the document. Put a file note, you're good. For the duration of the lockdown, because the relaxation is very specific that it only applies during the lockdown. Once you come out of lockdown, you then have to go and do the physical check. And if you don't do the physical check in a reasonable period of time, even if you've done it all right at this moment in time, you will still be liable to the penalty. Okay. So I would just keep a log of all the ones that you've done by virtual, and then when we come out of lockdown, get that log out and go and do the physical ones.
Yeah, okay. So we've got a question here from Lawrence Williams of Webbers, who just said, I'm reading some legal experts and advisors saying that checkouts conducted with health and safety in mind can go ahead. Would you support this softening of the sort of stay-at-home advice?
No. There's a simple answer to that.
Okay.
A checkout is not an essential activity, therefore stay at home. And on this one, the government's advice is clear. It's literally crystal clear. Stay at home unless it's essential. A checkout is not essential. The housing minister, I was about to say, has stood up in Parliament, has got as close as possible to standing up in Parliament and saying it's not. There was a written answer on Hansard from last week that letting agents are not essential. Where I can see the possibility of doing a checkout is where somebody has abandoned the property effectively. They have moved out against government guidelines, and you've now got an empty property that you want to try and relet, and you want to go and do the virtual viewing. You go and do the video to do virtual viewings. Now, I can see an argument of if you're going to go into the property, having left sufficient time in order for any virus that may have been left by the outgoing tenant to have died. If you're going in to do the video viewing, I don't see why you couldn't do the checkout at the same time. Right. Certainly making a special effort to go and do a checkout is, I would say, very much in breach of government guidelines at the moment.
Right. So Sally Dobbin asked from Wentworth about extensions. So she's saying, so take a notice served by a landlord, 3 months notice, with the tenant asking if that will be extended. Does it have to be extended if lockdown is extended?
Sorry, the 3 month notice to be extended.
Yeah, so for the sake of argument, there's a notice already served, but it would expire during lockdown, and does it have to be extended? And if lockdown gets extended further, 6 months for the sake of argument, does the notice have to be extended too?
Right. So I don't know the answer actually. At the moment, it is
I found one, David.
It's a moving feast, is the honest answer, William.
Yeah.
At the moment, what the Coronavirus Act says is that all notices are extended at this moment to 3 months. Whether the original notice would have been for 14 days, 2 months, whatever, everything is 3 months. But that can be extended by ministerial order. So at the moment, it is 3 months. When the notice has expired, you begin the possession proceedings as normal through the courts. Now, a couple of points on this one. Number one is that the ministers could extend that 3-month notice. So to answer the question, possibly. Simultaneously, we are currently suspending all proceedings. So from the 27th of March, there was a 90-day moratorium, which I think takes us to the 24th of June, where no possession proceedings will continue from where they are at the moment. Therefore, what I would suggest you do at this moment in time is when your notice expires, if you still do want to get the tenant out, you begin the court proceedings like you normally would for any other court process. You will lodge the case, but what will happen is that it will immediately be suspended at that moment in time, pending the Master of the Rolls withdrawing the practice direction that has suspended all court cases. So what I would suggest is at the moment, do it as normal. It just means it's going to hit an absolute brick wall the moment you proceed to court.
Okay.
As I understand it, if you leave it, the standard 4-month notice period expires.
Yeah. Right.
So you only have 4 months from the expiry of the notice to bring the proceedings. Otherwise, you have to start the whole process again.
Okay. And what about if it's a bit more aggressive than that, or if it's a tricky situation where there's non-payment of rent? So Nicola Jones has asked, what should we do if a tenant is refusing to communicate with us or pay their rent during this time?
Nicola, I'm afraid you're not going to like this answer, but there really is nothing you can do. And the ban on evictions is a ban on evictions. No matter what was being said at the time, that it's only technical, it's not. It was the legislative mechanism that the government used to ban evictions, and it's worked. There is an absolute ban on evictions at the moment. If the tenants are not paying their rent, all I can suggest is we did a webinar a few weeks ago on how to get tenants to pay the rent, and there's a difference between the can't pays and the won't pays. So the can't pays, certainly something that we've been working on is our Keep the Rent Flowing campaign, which I know Goodlord has supported, and where if there is a class of person that is falling through the safety net, let us know. We've been taking those to government. The prime example, agents themselves, the original furlough scheme got 80% of basic pay. Agents came to Mark Hayward and myself and said, look, we're losing out on all of our commissions. So we went to government, and now commissions are included within the furlough scheme. So we haven't had one actually for a week or two now where there is a specific class of people that is dropping through the net. If the 1,000-odd people that are on this webinar today, if there are still people that you're finding, let us know. We will take that to government. You then have the won't pays. And the won't pay, I think it's a mechanism of discussion. Do bear in mind, they're probably still paying their mobile phone contract, their broadband, the Sky. They just don't want to pay the rent. And it's not they can't pay, it's that they don't want to pay. So what I would suggest is to remind them that you will pursue them through the courts. They will be building up a massive rent arrears debt. And a county court judgment will make it more difficult for them to get credit cards, mobile phone contracts, any other sort of credit agreements, loans, car finance, and ultimately mortgage finance down the line, and look at their long-term future and their long-term financial future rather than short-term gain. Because take my word for it, a poor credit rating, which equals higher interest rates later down the line, you're going to be paying a lot more for your mortgage finance and car loans in 2 or 3 years' time than you're going to save on not paying the rent for a couple of months.
Yeah. And actually, just on that point, so obviously the government's been encouraging landlords and tenants to agree payment plans. And Paul Schenk's asking sort of how might that work? What information may reasonably be requested of tenants to understand their circumstances and doing a reasonable assessment of it? And how should a payment plan be structured?
So I think Paul makes a really interesting point. And what we are hearing that the market is doing, I think it seems quite sensible, is redoing that affordability criteria. So when you, especially with agents, you will have gone through the vetting and the referencing, got a lot of their financial detail, particularly if you use Goodlord referencing systems, for example, you'll have a lot of the information. Just redo it. You saw what their affordability calculator was when they first moved in. You'll now see, based on what they're now earning under COVID, what their affordability criteria, at which point you can then make evidence-based decisions rather than saying, okay, the furlough scheme drops to 80%, therefore we're only going to charge 80%. Do a slightly more scientific calculation, as you would have done when they first moved into the property.
Yeah, great. And what about somebody who's already been in arrears? Question from John Osborne at Osborne's actually. Tenant's been in arrears for a while and long before the lockdown, is now even more in arrears. What's the advice here? And in Section 8, Section 21, he's got, in this particular case, I think he's describing there's a guarantor, although he doesn't think that's necessarily going to help matters. Is it a case of small claims court or what?
I think it is, yes. If you can go against the guarantor and you've got a guarantor agreement, that is what they're there for if the tenant falls into arrears. And certainly that is something that I know in the student market particularly, where I think, interestingly, everybody has kind of been on the same page in relation to renting in the lettings market, be it us, the landlord bodies, the government. We are very much in tune with government policy on this one, and the government is very clear. First line of their guidance to landlords and tenants is pay the rent. Even the organisations like Shelter, I might sound slightly shocking, but I and ARLA signed a joint letter with Shelter CEO a couple of weeks ago on increasing the local housing allowance to the market rate, because Shelter also agrees that it is not in a tenant's, it's not beneficial for a tenant to be building up loads of loads of rent arrears. So they're also in support of keeping the rent flowing. It is just the NUS. I do accept, I'm sure, with the number of people that are on, there will be quite a few student agents listening today, many of whom may have had one of the, well, I've had 12 different versions of the same NUS letter saying give us rent reductions. The NUS seems to be the only organisation in the country at the moment that is thinking very short-sightedly about their students who had their student loans paid last week, so are the quintessential can pays, because they've just had a big chunk of money deposited into their account. And the government confirmed that those student loans were paid. So though that is the only organisation I know at the moment that is advocating not paying the rent.
Right.
What to do with somebody that is already in arrears, I'm afraid I don't know. The only thing I could suggest is the money advice service to get some sort of debt counselling for the tenant.
Okay, super. Very clear. I think just before we move on, a couple of other questions just here about the checkout here. So I think you've already answered one from Tom Chamber, actually, who was asking about if the property is already vacant, could we do a checkout? I think we covered that one. But Sarah Coxshots asked, although she says, I agree the checkout is not essential, but we have tenants chasing their deposits after move out as they're in financial difficulty. How do we handle those guys, or do they just have to wait?
So yeah, this was something that came to my attention not long after the initial 3-week lockdown was extended. And what happened originally was the deposit schemes said, well, we're in lockdown, it's not essential, therefore postpone everything for a month. Obviously, we then went into another period of lockdown and that month expired. So I think what the advice from the deposit scheme seems to be at the moment, and I'm in complete agreement with it, is if you have moved out, if you as a tenant have moved out against government guidelines and broken the law, because it is a breach of the Coronavirus Act to be doing that, you cannot then turn around to your landlord or your agent and say, well, I've broken the law, therefore I now want you to go and break the law and do my checkout.
Just on that point, sorry, is it breaking the law, or is it breaking government guidelines?
I would suggest it's actually breaching the restriction on movement legislation, the actual act itself.
Okay.
And just to give you an idea, I am aware of an agent, I'm not going to say where or who, but I am aware of an agent that has been prosecuted under the Coronavirus Act for undertaking a physical viewing. It wasn't last Saturday, it was a Saturday before, but the neighbour complained that an agent was doing several viewings of a property, their next door property, and the police turned up and prosecuted the agent. So
Okay.
I would strongly recommend not doing physical viewings at the moment.
Very clear, very helpful, thank you. David, that's fascinating, and you've come out with some very useful points there. But I think I want to turn to the next slug of questions, which is really just working dynamics. So sort of furlough, remote working, etc. Obviously, a new experience for a lot of us, but let's just start with the remote working side of this. So I've got a question here from Teresa Duarte at Life Residential. If employees use personal mobile devices or computers working from home, does this have implications in terms of GDPR breaches?
I think it can do, yes. I know it's something, I suppose Propertymark is in the same boat as everybody else. The last time I went into Arban House, Propertymark's head office, was on the 17th of March. We shut down at the end of that week, the week before lockdown was officially announced. About a third of our staff did not have laptops. They were still working off desktops in the office. We created virtual desktops through our IT support company so that none of Propertymark's data actually hit the personal computers of our teams who are operating on their own computers at home, at which point we've been able to maintain GDPR because once they are on their own computer, and as a tech company, you're going to be able to explain the technology behind this probably an awful lot better than I can. But as I understand it, it's a virtual desktop. It is their desktop at work that they're just seeing on a different computer, their home personal computer, and they can't transfer the data between the virtual desktop and their own computer, at which point we're maintaining GDPR. And therefore, I think it is things like that. And I would imagine, William, as a tech person, you could probably answer the how you do it a lot better than I can.
Yeah, look, and I think the way certainly I think about this is that if you're using cloud-based systems where it might look and feel like it's running on your computer, but actually you're using an internet site through your browser, then the data hasn't actually landed on your computer, and the data is as secure as the cloud-based system is. So if you use, for example, something like Goodlord, that is a cloud-based system. All the data doesn't get downloaded onto your machine. You can use any machine, frankly, as long as it hasn't been hacked or compromised, as long as it isn't being viewed by cameras, things like that could be used to steal data, which most offices are pretty secure on, but in homes you can't be quite as confident, or let alone in internet cafes or whatever it is. So, but you're right, David, that this is a technology question, this, rather than a legal question, really. But what about what about furlough, David? So, classic question here is sort of what exactly can staff do on furlough?
The honest answer is nothing apart from training. If they do any work, they're not on furlough. So they can do training. So today's webinar, that is completely acceptable because that's training. You can, if you're doing your qualification at the moment in advance of RoPA, that's perfectly acceptable. Online courses, again, and it doesn't matter whether it's run by your company or this, for example, that's still perfectly acceptable. It's just you can do training, you can't do any actual work. So doing any work at all for the company will breach the furlough.
Yeah, okay. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, but just talking about the question of is people's inability to move storing up demand, pent up demand for when it gets restricted, when the restrictions are lifted. Do you have any advice for how agencies should think about that?
Well, I would certainly say start planning for when it's going to be lifted. I can't tell you when. I know that both Mark and I are having regular daily discussions at the moment with the officials on how we're going to come out of lockdown. Plans are being put in place at the moment. I'm going to be honest, they're not massively far along as far as I understand, because I don't think this is going to happen imminently. I think we're still a good few weeks away. But start planning. Look up your workloads that you're doing at the moment. Are you expecting a lot of tenancies to physically move shortly after lockdown? if you are, you're going to need the staff to be able to do it. You're going to need, it's a logistical exercise more than anything of how are you going to get the gas certs, the electrical certs, the testing of the smoke alarm, how are you going to get all those done in a very short space of time? How are you going to get the inventories, the check-ins, the checkouts, or probably the checkouts from the people that have left, then inventory and everything sorted? What about if you've got to do work and cleaning and all those sort of things? So I would suggest take this time to plan a very detailed first 7 days back. Once as the business owner you have planned what you've got to do, you then know all the tasks that need to be done, then you've got to work out, I can't think of a better way of putting it, than the human resource required to undertake those tasks. And do remember that when you furlough somebody, they've got to be furloughed for a minimum of 3 weeks. So do factor in that if you're going to furlough somebody, they then live locked down. Or say we're a month down the line, and you're thinking about furloughing somebody, but it might be that you've only got 2 weeks left. If you furlough them and then bring them back in a fortnight, you're not going to be able to claim on the furlough scheme.
Yeah. And actually, one other question on furlough is just like, how's the enforcement going to work out? How are they going to check whether that thing you did was training or actually work?
I don't know. I have no idea. Sorry.
Found another one, David.
Yeah, that one. Great question. No idea the answer. Sorry. Not even going to have a stab at it.
Okay. Actually, it's a question a little bit like this, actually just coming in on Twitter, actually, from Seth Griffiths. Are we allowed to go and take a video tour of a vacant property?
So it's not technically essential, but if it's one person going to a property that's been empty for, I think the government guidelines is still 72 hours it takes for the virus to die on most surfaces. So maybe 72 hours since the property was vacated. It's one person going to have a look at the property, also maybe doing the checkout, checking that the property is secure as well. I think that should be okay. I can't guarantee it. It is technically a breach of the Act because it's not essential. But if you're going to put an essential worker in, maybe you could argue that it is essential. So it's one of those legal grey areas. But I know how much pent-up frustration there is in the market to move. You've got properties sitting empty. You want to get them at least so that they can be viewed virtually online. I could probably see an argument where that would be at least arguably acceptable, even if not strictly in accordance with government guidelines.
Yeah, and an interesting one here, actually, talking about furlough and training from, just again off Twitter, from Felicity Blair, actually. She's saying, okay, so if staff can receive training, can they be asked to do training while on furlough?
Yeah, and the furlough guidelines do make it clear that you can't do work, you can do training. So, yeah, I think it would be perfectly acceptable to say we're furloughing you, we're still paying you 80% of your, well, I think it's either your average take-home pay over the last 12 months or what you got paid this month last year, whichever is greater. Therefore, we expect you to do your training. I know, for example, we've had a huge number of people asking about Propertymark qualifications. We have furloughed staff, as have probably everybody listening. Not quite as many as we were expecting, because we have had a lot of interest in courses, qualifications, and the webinar program that we're running. So we have had a lot of interest. I don't think there's anything wrong with expecting your staff to do their qualifications whilst they're on furlough.
But I suppose be a member as a faculty and actually run training for other people. That's really the question here.
Oh, well, go out and do physical face-to-face training? Not
necessarily, no, but say run a webinar for the sake of argument, or kind of take people through on a video call or something.
I think that is absolutely fine. Okay. You and I are managing to do a webinar today.
We're not furloughed.
So
I'm not furloughed, at least not yet, thankfully. But
sorry, the furloughed member of staff.
That's the question, yes.
So sorry, got you. The furloughed member of staff, no, because they're doing the training.
Doing work,
receiving the training.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, didn't understand that one.
No, fair enough. Sorry, I should have clarified. Okay, just I think before we move on to the next section, I just want to make sure people on the call are aware. If you're a customer of ours already, hopefully you're aware of this, but we've been trying to do our bit to support agents here as their work patterns change. And two things really that we've done: we've created a pay-as-you-get paid support package for agents, so that they, with the current levels of uncertainty, they're not on the hook for the normal subscription costs. And they don't have to have any financial commitments for 6 months under this scheme. We're also obviously very much encouraging agents to focus on renewals, and to that end, actually, on our platform we've made renewals free until the end of the quarter. So trying to do our bit to help agents in these very difficult times, and make sure they've got some support from us if they're customers of ours. Well, let's just move on back to the question. So I think we've got some questions here around electrical safety regulations. Let me just find those. So for example, David Cox from Drury & Drury is asking, are the planned new regulations, electrical regulations, actually, which you probably need to summarise for us, David, are they still due to start on the 1st of July?
Yes, I'm afraid. We can agree, we can disagree, but the government have made very clear legal responsibilities are legal responsibilities. You should continue doing them where you can. So that includes the electrical safety regulations from the 1st of July. So just for a bit of clarity for anybody that's not completely clear, the electrical safety regulations say that from the 1st of July, all new and relets, and that is from tenancy start date of 1st of July, not tenancy signature date like the Tenant Fees Act. So from tenancy start date, or tenancy renewal date, all new tenancies from the 1st of July needs an electrical installation condition report. It's a little bit more detailed than that, but if we leave it at that, you do need to do it. The government guidance is clear, and whether it's electrical, gas, fire safety, testing smoke alarm, first day of tenancy, MEs and EPCs, you still need to do those under lockdown. If you'd like, I can go into some sort of a little bit more detail on that one, William.
Well, actually, I'll tell you who'd really like some detail. It sounds quite a tricky situation. It's Vicky Hamley at Kelling Estate. So she says she's got several properties due for one of these electrical safety inspections, but she's got properties with tenants who are in the at-risk category, either disabled or severe illnesses, or I think she's saying under shielding and total isolation. So she's not allowed to send anybody in, and the electricians want to go in, but they can't get in. Is there any allowance being made for this?
Yes, there is, and I think that's the key point. Where an agent and landlord has done everything that they can, they have an excuse against penalty. So let's take Vicky's example there. Perfect example. She's got the contractor. She found a contractor that can do the work. Wants to send them in. Tenant said no. Now, I saw some research from Generation Rent a couple of weeks ago that suggested over 60% of tenants are refusing entry to contractors, landlords, agents at the moment. And one, I thought that was actually a little bit low. I thought it would have been higher than that. But I think it's also totally understandable. Would you want a stranger in your home at this moment in time? For most people, I would say the answer is probably going to be no, unless you've invited them in. Therefore, what the government has put in the guidance very clearly is you need to do your legal obligations, but if the tenant says no, then that is your excuse. Make sure you've got it documented as a file note on your system, and that when you come out the other end, and we are in a post-lockdown world, you've got a log of all the properties that, 5 Acacia Avenue needs its electrical safety check and its gas, 6 Acacia Avenue just needs its gas, etc., and you get those done as a matter of priority. Same with the right to rent checks.
Excellent.
What I would also say is where you are sending people in, just make sure that you are minimizing virus transmission. So, i.e., one, check with both parties that they're not experiencing symptoms, they haven't got it, go through what the symptoms are, and then when they get there, if possible, if there's a garden, tenants go into the garden whilst the contractor is there doing their work. If it's not, just try and make sure that the tenants are in a different room from the contractor to minimize interaction and possible viral transmission. and of course maintaining the government social distancing guidelines.
Okay, great. Actually, and we had questions from Sheraton Simeo, Mandy Weissman, and Natalie Brown on Twitter a few minutes ago. I think you've just tackled all of their questions actually, so that's great. There's an edge case here from Kelly McAvoy in Chesterton, though, who says she's already working on renewals for a July tenancy. If she's got the renewal signed and executed now, the tenancy doesn't start until after 1st of July. Will any ICR be required?
Yes, because this one, it's a question that we've had, and we have double checked this one, because if you think about the Tenant Fees Act, that was all about the date the tenancy was entered into, i.e. you could sign the renewal now, or you could at this point last year, and fees were still applicable. Whereas this one is the opposite. It's about tenancy start dates. So it doesn't matter when you've signed the tenancy. So if you've renewed your tenancy for July today, if the tenancy start date, the renewal date is the 1st of July, you need to comply with the EICR.
Yeah, okay. Very helpful, thank you. So let's move on to another popular topic here, Section 21. Got a question actually from Let's Relocate, who say, if you've already served Section 21 before the lockdown started, is it still valid?
It's still valid, it's just suspended under Practice Direction 27 from the Master of the Rolls. So if you've served it, it's expired. So if it was served and expired and court proceedings had already started when we hit lockdown and the suspension on the 27th of March, it's just suspended. If you'd served it, but it hadn't expired, it's still within the 2 months, so you don't need to put that extra month on. But once it's expired, under the Deregulation Act, you only have 4 months to start proceedings. Therefore, what I would suggest is if you do still want to go forward with the eviction, begin the proceedings now, even though once you've lodged the case at court, the court will just go, we're suspending till at least the 24th of June. But if you don't lodge the case, you're going to run out of time under the Deregulation Act and have to start the whole process again.
Okay, great. And what about all the changes coming around abolishing Section 21? And when do you think it's going to happen? And in particular, actually, we had Paul Chamberlain on our webinar last week who was suggesting he thinks the ban falling under the Renters Reform Bill is actually going to happen faster. What's your take on it?
At this moment in time, government is really not thinking about anything other than coronavirus.
Right.
And the implications of coronavirus. I speak to the officials pretty much every day. Yes, the abolition of Section 21, the Renters Reform Bill, is a key piece of legislation that is a top priority for the government. However, the only priority for the government at the moment is tackling the coronavirus pandemic. So, the regulation of property agency you've got underneath that is pretty much put on hold at the moment. The abolition of Section 21 is also basically put on hold at the moment. And the last time I actually spoke to the officials, particularly about this, they were still analysing consultation responses because they'd had so many.
Right.
But that was a few weeks ago. And all those officials that the officials that I speak to that were leading on that work are all dealing with various aspects of coronavirus at this moment in time. So I'm sure it probably is still ticking along quietly in the background, but it's not at the forefront of the minds of the senior civil servants that will be pushing things forward. We also have a new housing minister since that was announced. So is it going to be a priority for the new housing?
Right. And actually, so if you've got anything to say to Russell Permer from Inner City Estates, who just says, is there an update on the issue, the Section 21 issue around if tenants refuse to renew, but the landlords don't want to revert to a periodic contract?
Well, in that situation, then you have to serve Section 21 at the moment, but you're not going to be able to get the tenant out. Therefore, you have a situation of having to pursue the tenants through the courts if they refuse to leave, but you're not actually going to be able to do that for several months. So once again, either the tenant will have to stay in the property, continue paying rent, or they'll start building up rent arrears, and we go back to our earlier questions about how to tackle tenants that won't pay their rent.
Yeah, okay. And just sort of sneaking in a Section 8 question, actually. This is from Joni Alexander Robinson in brackets. She's just saying, really finds the Section 8 court process very slow, no guarantees of repayment of rent arrears. any prospect of that being improved?
Yeah, and one of the reasons that this is taking longer than the government probably wanted was because this is a cross-departmental initiative. Housing law is governed by MHCLG, Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. But this is about changing court processes and court procedures, and the government have been very clear that they are not planning on abolishing Section 21 until they have improved Section 8. Now that requires the Ministry of Justice to be heavily involved, and Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service. If they are going more to a tribunal versus a court, we've already got the first tier tribunal property chamber. So there's a lot of different government players and a lot of very powerful government players. It is not something that MHCLG has the authority to just do on its own. It needs to work with other government departments. And just to give you an idea, if we've got anybody from Wales on watching today, they passed the Renting Homes Act in Wales in 2016, completely changing tenure and private rented tenure in Wales. That hasn't come into force because nobody spoke to the Ministry of Justice from the Welsh government, and that law required a huge amount of change of how the court processes work. And the Ministry of Justice just went, well, you passed a law without telling us. We haven't got time to do this.
Right.
See you in a few years' time. Bye. And it's now 2020. And they haven't got any further forward.
Right.
So that shows quite how powerful the Ministry of Justice is to tenure reform. But they've learnt that they've got to work together. So I don't know the answer to when it's going to happen. Not anytime soon. And bear in mind, even once we've got to legislation going through, we're still years away from it actually coming into force.
Yeah.
William?
So, excellent, thank you. I think I've just got time for one more section here, which is just regarding the regulation of property agents. So, I actually got a lot of people asking.
Yep.
Sorry, David, we may be having the dreaded technical gremlins here. Let me have another go. So I'm moving on to regulation of property agents report. We've got a lot of questions around this. Probably one example of which is Fee Walkley from Foxtons, who's just said, what are the likely timeframes, in your opinion, of bringing in the minimum qualifications recommended for the regulation of property agents? And do you think the pandemic is likely to have an impact on it?
So high fee, yes. Very
David,
good
I'm not
question.
hearing you at the moment. I don't know if you're somehow on mute.
I'm afraid to say is yes.
Oh, there you go, you're back.
The pandemic has unquestionably. No. I'm getting a bit of time lag from you at the moment, William. So what I would say is, yes, I think the pandemic has had an impact on timescale, be it the Section 21 or RoPA. I would say probably about a year is the honest answer. We are probably about a year behind schedule at this point in time. So when I was saying, not about a year ago when the report was initially came out, probably 2023, 2024, we're probably 12 months behind that now as a result of COVID. And things just have not progressed quite as quickly because there's been high priorities.
Right. So has there been any change in what we expect? So, and maybe you can just fill people in, what should we expect it to look like and for what qualifications?
So we are still expecting that the recommendations will be taken forward pretty much as is. So what I'm expecting is it will be a level 3 for employees. It will probably be a level 4 for employers. The business owners, the most senior person with day-to-day responsibility for the letting, sales, auctioneering businesses, and block management if you do those as well. So this is why we've probably seen quite an uptake in people taking the qualifications to get ahead of RoPA. We know that it's going to have to be an Ofqual regulated qualification. There aren't that many Ofqual regulated qualifications in the market, but now is a great time to actually do the study. I will say, just for clarity, that if anybody is taking Propertymark qualifications at the moment, because you have to go and sit your exams in the Pearson VUE test centres, those are closed for obvious reasons at the moment. But as soon as they are able to be reopened, you will be able to book your actual exam. But now's a great time to do the study.
Okay, great. I'm realizing we have got a bit of lag here, so I'm sorry about that. I think having 1,000+ people on a webinar is obviously causing some stresses and strain, so apologies. I think we'll just do one more question to wrap up, which is, let me just find a good one for you here, David. We've got I think yeah, what do you think is going to be next when we get through this? When we get through the regulation of property agents, when we get through Section 21, what's even further out on the horizon in your mind?
Well, that is a really good question. There is a lot going on at the moment. I think the impact of coronavirus and COVID-19 on the way agents have been doing their businesses, and have been running their businesses in the past, how they are doing it under lockdown, and some of the learnings that they are making, is going to change the market quite significantly. On top of that, government is sooner or later going to go back to its normal course of business. So it's going to go back to, as we've got here, regulation of property agents, abolition of Section 21. Once we come out of those, I think, one, they're going to be looking at regulation of landlords. So the plan has always been, we start with property agents, we then go on to the landlords, and that deals with kind of one side of the private rented sector, which is the management standards. The second side of that is the property standards. And it's where I do think we are going to go into a much tougher regime on property standards. And it is why I'm actually going on to a meeting about it later this afternoon. We are trying to get out ahead of that with the concept of a property MOT, similar to a car, rather than having a whole raft of new laws thrown at the industry. If we can try and shape what comes next, like we have done with the regulation and the management standards, it's going to be much easier for the industry to accept, much more palatable and on the industry's terms, than have a whole collection of laws just thrown at us like we have done over the last 10 years. This is our opportunity to say we accept that there is an issue. It's only a tiny issue affecting a small minority of properties, but it's an issue that is raised constantly with government. Therefore, let's get out in front of it. Let's get the solution sorted so that when we have got through the regulation, the abolition of Section 21, we can then take more of the front foot and say, we accept government that you think this is an issue, here is the solution.
Super. Very helpful, David. Thank you. And again, sorry, we've got a bit of a lag. So I'm just going to conclude the webinar with just a couple of points. I'm very grateful for David for joining us here, covering so many topics so authoritatively. If you do want to catch up on any more details, we've been recording this webinar, we'll be distributing it. We've also got a COVID-19 resources section on our website with a whole bunch of reference guides and useful material there. We've got a team of people who've been working diligently on that ever since the lockdown started. So hopefully people will find that helpful. If you want to talk to us about any of this, you can book a call. Ross is standing by, goodlord.co/book a call. As I said earlier, we're very much trying to support agents here, and we're offering various ways to do that with our pay only when you get paid offer, and supporting renewals free, and of course making sure people can work remotely with confidence with the compliance tools that our cloud-based platform provides. We've got another webinar actually on the 12th of May, hosted by our very own Peter Knight, who will be discussing his highly effective marketing plan, and David's joining us again on the 22nd of September. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, David, for all your help today, and thanks to all our listeners for listening, and stay safe, keep washing those hands. Thank you, everybody.